The East River smelled like diesel and dead fish at 4 in the morning. March 14th, 1951, 4:07 a.m. Two beat cops on routine patrol noticed something hanging from the lower cables of the Brooklyn Bridge. At first, they thought it was a mannequin, some kind of prank from the college kids. Then the thing moved. It was a man. Both hands tied above his head with steel wire, suspended 3 feet over the black water, his body swinging slowly in the freezing wind. His face was swollen purple. His Italian leather shoes were gone. His $1,000 suit was torn to rags, and carved into the back of his left hand, deep enough to scar for life, were 2 letters, BJ. The man's name was Salvatore Luciano Jr., Sal to his friends, the eldest son of Charles Lucky Luciano, the single most powerful mob boss in American history. And 48 hours earlier, Sal had done something that nobody in New York's underworld could believe. He'd walked into a Harlem restaurant, looked Bumpy Johnson's wife Mayme straight in the face, and spat on her. What happened in those 48 hours between the spit and the bridge didn't just terrify the Italian mob. It rewrote the unwritten rules of respect between Harlem and downtown Manhattan forever. Now, before we even get into this, if you're the type of person who loves real stories about loyalty, respect, and what happens when powerful men cross the wrong line, hit that subscribe button right now. Smash that like button because I promise you, this story is about to go somewhere you don't expect. The way Bumpy handled this situation was so calculated, so precise, that the Italian mob talked about it for decades. You don't want to miss a single word of what comes next. But to understand why a man ended up dangling from the Brooklyn Bridge with Bumpy Johnson's initials carved into his skin, you have to understand what Harlem looked like in the spring of 1951, who held the power, who wanted to take it, and why disrespecting Bumpy's wife was the single worst decision Sal Luciano ever made in his short, stupid career. In 1951, Bumpy Johnson was at the absolute height of his power. He'd come through a brutal decade of gang wars, police raids, betrayals, and prison time, and he'd come out the other side stronger and sharper than ever. Every block in Harlem from 110th Street all the way up to 155th Street answered to Bumpy. The numbers racket, the nightclubs, the after-hours joints, the protection networks, the political connections. All of it flowed through him. Nothing moved in Harlem without Bumpy knowing about it, and nothing happened without his permission. But here's what set Bumpy apart from every other gangster walking the streets of New York. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just feared, he was genuinely deeply loved by his community, and that's not something you hear about gangsters very often. When families in Harlem got eviction notices they couldn't fight, Bumpy paid the rent. Didn't ask for anything in return, just paid it. When young black men came home from the Korean War and couldn't find work because nobody would hire them, Bumpy found them jobs. When the cops decided to crack down on black-owned businesses for no reason other than to shake them down, Bumpy made one phone call and the harassment stopped overnight. He funded churches. He bought school supplies for kids who couldn't afford notebooks. He made sure the elderly folks on his block had groceries delivered every single week. The Italian mob looked at Harlem and saw dollar signs, a cash register, a colony to be exploited. Bumpy looked at Harlem and saw home, his people, his responsibility. And that fundamental difference in how they saw the neighborhood is exactly why the Italians could never take it from him. You can't beat a man who's fighting for something he loves. You just can't. Now, on the other side of this story, you had Lucky Luciano. By 1951, Lucky was technically in exile. The United States government had deported him to Italy after the war as part of a deal that nobody fully understood. But being in Italy didn't mean Lucky had lost his grip on the American underworld, not even close. He still controlled his empire from a villa outside Naples through a network of underbosses, lawyers, wire transfers, and coded phone calls. The man ran a criminal organization across an ocean like it was a regular Tuesday, and Lucky's oldest son, Salvatore Jr., had been given a very specific assignment: manage the family's day-to-day interests in New York City, collect what's owed from the various operations, expand territory wherever the opportunity presented itself. Simple enough instructions. The problem was the person following them. Sal was 26 years old. He'd grown up rich, protected, and completely sheltered from the reality of street life. He'd never been punched in the face. He'd never spent a night in jail. He'd never gone hungry or cold or scared, and because of who his father was, nobody had ever told Sal no, not once in his entire privileged life. Waiters said yes, sir. Bodyguards said right away. Business owners handed over envelopes without being asked. Sal had never earned a single ounce of respect. It had all been given to him on a silver platter because of his last name. That made Sal dangerous. Not dangerous in the way a smart, experienced man is dangerous. Dangerous in the way that only a fool with a famous last name can be. He believed the Luciano name was a force field. He believed it made him untouchable, invincible, immune to consequences. He believed he could walk into any neighborhood in New York and do whatever he pleased because his daddy was the great Lucky Luciano. The older Italian bosses knew better. Men like Frank Costello and Carlo Gambino had dealt with Bumpy Johnson for years. They'd learned through painful experience that you negotiated with Bumpy or you lost to him. There was no third option. But Sal hadn't learned those lessons. He'd grown up hearing fairy tales about how the Italian mob owned New York, and he believed every single word. Now there's one more person you need to know before this story makes sense. Mayme Johnson, Bumpy's wife. Mayme was not a woman who hid in the background while her husband handled business. She was educated, elegant, sophisticated, and sharp as a straight razor. She ran community programs. She organized charity events. She was respected by everyone from street hustlers to city councilmen, and Bumpy adored her, worshipped her. Everyone in Harlem knew that Mayme was the one sacred line you absolutely did not cross. You could insult Bumpy's business. You could challenge his territory. You could even take a shot at him if you were foolish enough. But God help you if you disrespected Mayme Johnson, because Bumpy would dismantle your entire existence piece by piece, and he'd do it slowly, methodically, so you felt every single second of it. That was the landscape in March of 1951. Bumpy sitting at the top of Harlem, Sal Luciano thinking he was untouchable, and a collision barreling toward both of them that nobody on earth could stop. March 12, 1951, 2 days before the bridge. Sal Luciano had been back in New York for about 3 months at that point, and in those 3 months he'd already made an impressive mess of things. He'd been shaking down businesses in Midtown that didn't belong to his family's territory. He'd been throwing his father's name around at every restaurant and card game in the city like it was a magic password. And worst of all, he'd started pushing into Harlem. It started small, the way these things always do. A couple of Italian runners showed up on 125th Street one afternoon trying to take bets on Sal's numbers line instead of Bumpy's. Bumpy's people told them politely but firmly to leave. They left. But then they came back the next week with more guys. Bumpy's people told them again, less politely this time, and that's when one of the Italian runners said something that changed the temperature of this entire situation. "We're here on behalf of Sal Luciano, Lucky's son. You got a problem with that? Take it up with him." Bumpy heard about it that same afternoon. He didn't react, didn't raise his voice, didn't send anyone to deliver a message. He just filed it away in that brilliant, calculating mind of his. That was Bumpy's way. He never reacted in the moment. He watched, he waited, he let people show him exactly who they were, and then he moved. But then came the restaurant. That evening, Mayme Johnson was having dinner at Sylvia's on Lenox Avenue with 2 of her closest friends. A quiet dinner, nothing flashy. Mayme was wearing a simple blue dress and her favorite pearl earrings. They were eating fried chicken and cornbread, laughing, talking about an upcoming church fundraiser when the front door of the restaurant banged open and Sal Luciano walked in with 4 of his men trailing behind him. Sal was drunk, sloppy, stumbling drunk. You could smell the whiskey on him from across the room. He was loud, laughing too hard at nothing, bumping into chairs and tables as he moved through the restaurant. His men were trying to steer him quietly to a booth in the back corner, but then Sal spotted Mayme. Someone sitting at the bar leaned over and whispered to one of Sal's bodyguards. "Hey, that woman right there? That's Bumpy Johnson's wife." The bodyguard's face went pale. He grabbed Sal's arm hard. Sal, let's just sit down. Come on, leave it alone." But Sal yanked his arm free. He walked right over to Mayme's table. He planted himself there, swaying on his feet, looking down at her with a sloppy, arrogant smirk smeared across his face. "You're Bumpy's woman?" he said, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "The big bad Bumpy Johnson? Tell your husband something for me. Tell him Harlem's got a new boss now, and his name is Luciano. Mayme looked up at him with an expression that could have frozen the Hudson River solid, calm, completely unbothered. Young man, I think you should sit down before you embarrass yourself any further. That's when Sal did it. He leaned forward and spat, not on the floor, not to the side, right onto the table. The spit landed on Mayme's plate of food, on her dinner, inches from her hands. The entire restaurant went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Conversations died mid-word. Every single person in that room understood what they had just witnessed, and every single person in that room knew exactly what was coming next. Mayme didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She picked up her napkin, wiped the edge of the table with perfect composure, stood up from her chair, and walked out of the restaurant without saying a single word. Her two friends followed close behind, both of them visibly shaking. Sal laughed. His men didn't. One of them, a guy named Paulie DeMauro, looked like he was about to be physically sick. He knew. They all knew. They'd just watched Sal Luciano sign his own death warrant with a mouthful of spit. Within 30 minutes, Bumpy Johnson knew every detail of what happened. Within an hour, he'd made 3 phone calls to 3 very specific people. And within 2 hours, a plan was already in motion that would send a message so loud and so clear that the entire New York underworld would still be talking about it 50 years later. Here's what nobody knew at the time. Bumpy didn't find out about the restaurant from some random witness or a piece of neighborhood gossip that trickled up to him hours later. He found out from someone inside Sal's own crew. Remember Paulie DeMauro, the bodyguard who looked like he was going to throw up? Paulie had been quietly feeding information to Bumpy for almost a full year. Not because Bumpy had blackmailed him or threatened his family. Because Bumpy had done Paulie a favor 18 months earlier that Paulie could never repay. Paulie's mother was elderly. She lived alone in a tiny apartment in Harlem. She got sick. Real sick. Pneumonia that turned into something worse. She needed a specialist she could never afford. Bumpy found out about it through one of his people, and without being asked, without expecting anything in return, he paid for the entire treatment. Paulie's mother survived. Paulie never forgot that, and he never would. So the second Sal spat on Mayme's dinner table, Paulie didn't wait for the gossip to make its rounds through Harlem. He walked straight out of Sylvia's, found a payphone on the corner of Lenox and 127th, and called Bumpy directly. "Mr. Johnson, it's Paulie. Listen. Something just happened at Sylvia's that you need to hear about. Sal Luciano disrespected your wife. In front of the whole restaurant, he spat on her table. I'm sorry, I tried to pull him away. He wouldn't listen." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Paulie could hear Bumpy breathing, but nothing else. Then Bumpy spoke. His voice was so quiet, so controlled, that Paulie had to press the phone hard against his ear to hear him. "Where is Sal going tonight?" "He's got a high-stakes card game at a warehouse on Atlantic Avenue, Brooklyn side. Starts around midnight. He'll probably have 3 guys with him, maybe 4. The rest of his crew will be uptown." "Thank you, Paulie. You did the right thing. Now go home. Stay inside. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Bumpy hung up the phone. And then he did something that surprised even the people who knew him best. He didn't explode. He didn't shout. He didn't grab a weapon and race to Brooklyn looking for blood. Instead, he walked into his private office above Small's Paradise Jazz Club, sat down in his leather chair, lit a Cuban cigar, and stared at the wall. For 3 hours. 3 full hours of total silence, just thinking. See, most men in Bumpy's position would have killed Sal outright. Quick. Quiet. A body dumped in the East River by sunrise. Problem solved. Disrespect answered. But Bumpy was not most men. Bumpy thought in layers. He understood that killing Lucky Luciano's son would trigger an all-out war between Harlem and the Italian families. Bullets would fly. Innocent people in his neighborhood would get hurt. Businesses would burn. Everything Bumpy had spent 20 years building could collapse in a week of violence. Bumpy didn't want a war. He wanted something far more powerful than a war. He wanted a message so vivid, so unforgettable, so perfectly crafted that no Italian mobster, no matter how drunk or how stupid or how powerful his father was, would ever think about disrespecting anyone in Harlem again. At 11 that night, Bumpy made his calls. Illinois Gordon, his most trusted enforcer. a dock worker named Freddie who knew every inch of the Brooklyn waterfront, a driver named Clyde who had the fastest car in Harlem and nerves made of concrete, and one more man, Solomon Hayes, a city maintenance worker who had master keys to places most New Yorkers didn't even know existed, including the service walkways and cable access points underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. The plan came together in under an hour. It was surgical, it was elegant, and it was specifically designed to humiliate without killing, because Bumpy understood something that most people in his line of work never figured out. A dead man tells no stories, but a humiliated man tells everyone. A dead enemy sends one message, a humiliated enemy sends 1,000. By midnight, Bumpy's people were in position. All they had to do now was wait for Sal to finish losing money at his card game and walk out into the Brooklyn night. March 13th, 1951. 2:14 a.m., Brooklyn. Sal's card game broke up around 2 in the morning. He'd lost close to $800. He was still half drunk from earlier, and he was in a foul mood. His 3 remaining bodyguards walked him out to his car, a polished black Lincoln Continental parked on a dark, empty side street off Atlantic Avenue. Street lights were out on that block, had been for weeks. Nobody thought anything of it. They should have. 6 men came out of the shadows, fast, silent, professional, not a single gun among them, just fists, muscle, and bad intentions. Sal's bodyguards went down in seconds. The first one took a punch to the throat so hard he crumpled to the sidewalk gasping. The second got his legs swept out from under him and his head bounced off the curb with a sound like a coconut cracking. The third one, the smart one, put both hands in the air and backed away slowly into the darkness. Nobody chased him. He wasn't the target. Sal tried to run. He made it about 10 feet before Illinois. Gordon caught him by the back of his collar and slammed him face first into the side of the Lincoln so hard that the driver's side window spiderwebbed with cracks. "You know who I am?" Sal screamed. All that confidence from the restaurant, all that big talk about being Harlem's new boss was completely gone now. His voice was shaking like a child's. "My father is Lucky Luciano. You hear me? You touch me and every single one of you is dead. My father will kill all of you." Illinois Gordon didn't say a word. He pulled a black cloth bag over Sal's head, zip-tied his wrists behind his back, picked him up off his feet, and threw him into the trunk of Clyde's waiting car like a bag of dirty laundry. 20 minutes later, they were at the Brooklyn Bridge. Solomon had already unlocked the service access gate on the Brooklyn side. They hauled Sal out of the trunk and carried him down a narrow, rusted metal walkway that ran underneath the bridge deck. The walkway was barely 3 feet wide. Below them, about 15 feet down, the East River churned cold and black in the darkness. The wind at that hour was brutal, cutting through clothing like it wasn't there. They pulled the bag off Sal's head, and there, standing on that narrow walkway in a perfectly pressed dark overcoat and his trademark gray fedora, was Bumpy Johnson, hands clasped behind his back, face completely calm, like he was waiting for a table at a restaurant. Every drop of color drained from Sal's face. Every ounce of drunk bravado from the restaurant evaporated like steam. What was left was a terrified 26-year-old kid standing on a bridge in the freezing cold, suddenly realizing that his father's name was not going to save him here. "Do you know why you're here?" Bumpy asked. His voice was calm, conversational almost, like he was asking about the weather. Sal was trembling so violently he could barely stay on his feet. "Look, whatever I did, we can talk about this. My father, he'll pay whatever you want. Name your price." "Your father isn't here." 4 words, the simplest sentence in the English language. But the way Bumpy delivered it, quiet, without anger, just pure, undeniable fact, it shattered something inside Sal. His legs buckled. He dropped to his knees on the metal walkway and started sobbing. Bumpy stepped closer. He looked down at Sal the way a teacher looks at a student who has failed a very important test. "You came into my neighborhood. You put your runners on my streets. I let that slide. Business is business, and I'm a reasonable man. But then you walked into a restaurant where my wife was eating her dinner in peace. You looked at her, and you spat on her food." Bumpy paused. The wind screamed around them. The bridge cables hummed. "My wife, Sal. The woman I love more than anything on this earth, the woman who has never harmed a living soul, And you spat on her like she was nothing, like she didn't matter. Sal was crying openly now, snot and tears running down his swollen face. I was drunk. I swear I didn't mean it. I wasn't thinking. Being drunk doesn't change what you are. It just shows it. Bumpy nodded to Illinois. They tied Sal's wrists to the bridge cable with steel wire, not tight enough to cut off circulation, not loose enough to escape. Professional. Then Bumpy reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, sharp pocket knife. He took Sal's left hand, turned it over, and slowly, deliberately, carved 2 letters into the skin on the back of it. B.J. Sal screamed into the wind. The sound disappeared over the river. Every time you look at your hand for the rest of your life, Bumpy said quietly, you'll remember tonight. Every time someone asks about that scar, you'll have to tell them what you did, and what happened because of it. Bumpy straightened his fedora, adjusted his coat, looked at Sal one final time. Tell your father something for me. Tell him Harlem sends its regards, and tell him that the next time one of his people disrespects my family, I won't be this kind. Then Bumpy turned around, walked calmly down the narrow metal walkway, climbed into Clyde's waiting car, and drove back to Harlem. He was home before 3:30. Mayme was still awake, sitting up in bed reading a novel. Bumpy kissed her on the forehead, hung up his overcoat, and went to sleep. Sal Luciano hung from that bridge cable, crying and shivering in the dark, for nearly 2 hours before those patrol cops finally spotted him at dawn. By sunrise on March 14th, every single person connected to New York's underworld knew what had happened on that bridge. The cops pulled Sal down at around 4:15 in the morning. He was hypothermic, dehydrated, and shaking so badly the paramedics thought he was having a seizure. They rushed him to Brooklyn Hospital. Doctors treated his wounds. Detectives showed up to take a statement. Sal refused to say a word, wouldn't identify his attackers, wouldn't press charges, wouldn't explain how he ended up dangling from a bridge with 2 letters carved into his hand. All he kept repeating, over and over, was one sentence. I fell. Nobody believed him, especially not with BJ scarred into his skin. But it didn't matter. Sal understood what would happen if he opened his mouth. And more importantly, so did Lucky. 2 days after the bridge incident, Lucky Luciano placed a phone call from his villa outside Naples to an underboss in Manhattan. The conversation lasted less than 90 seconds. The order was simple and final. Pull every single one of our people out of Harlem, effective immediately. No exceptions, no delays. The underboss protested. Boss, the numbers operation up there is worth a fortune. We're talking, I don't care what it's worth. Pull them out. My son is lying in a hospital bed because I didn't listen when people told me to leave Harlem alone. Well, I'm listening now. Harlem belongs to Bumpy Johnson. It always has. And we are never going there again. Within 72 hours, every Italian runner, every collector, every soldier connected to the Luciano family had vanished from Harlem. Gone. Like they were never there. Bumpy didn't have to fire a single shot. He didn't start a war. He didn't kill anyone. Sal Luciano flew back to Italy the following week on his father's orders. He never set foot in New York City again for the rest of his life. People who encountered him years later in Sicily noticed that he always wore a thin leather glove on his left hand, even in the brutal Sicilian summer heat. He never talked about what happened on that bridge, but he didn't need to. The scar told the story every time someone shook his hand. Back in Harlem, the story of that night spread like a gospel hymn. People didn't just whisper about it in barbershops and after-hours joints. They told it proudly on stoops, in churches, at Sunday dinner tables, at funerals. It became proof. Living, breathing proof that Harlem had a protector who would go to the ends of the earth for his people and his family. That respect in this neighborhood was not just a word, it was the law. And Bumpy Johnson was the one who enforced it. Everybody talks about power like it's about money, like it's about guns, like it's about territory or connections or how many soldiers you've got on speed dial. It's not. Power is about what people believe. And after that night on the Brooklyn Bridge, every person in the New York underworld believed the exact same thing. You do not disrespect Bumpy Johnson's family. You do not disrespect Harlem. And if you are foolish enough to cross that line, you had better pray that Bumpy Johnson is in a generous mood. Because what Sal Luciano got, hanging from a bridge with initials carved into his hand, that was mercy. Imagine what would have happened if Bumpy wasn't feeling merciful. Sal had his father's name, his father's money, his father's soldiers, and his father's entire empire behind him. None of it mattered, not a single bit of it. Because names don't protect you, titles don't protect you, money doesn't protect you, respect protects you, and respect isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn, every single day, through your actions, through your choices, through what you're willing to do for the people you love. Bumpy Johnson understood that better than anyone who ever lived. All right, if this story hit you different, if it gave you chills, if you're sitting there right now thinking about the kind of man it takes to pull something like that off, do me a favor, hit that like button, smash that subscribe, turn on notifications. Because next time, we're telling the story of how Bumpy Johnson walked into a room full of armed Gambino soldiers, completely alone and completely unarmed, and made every last one of them put their weapons on the floor. That story is absolutely insane, and you do not want to miss it. Drop a comment and tell me, did Bumpy go too far with Sal, or did Lucky Luciano's son get exactly what he deserved? See you in the next one.